You are listening to Novel Nest Audio. Episode 6, The First Step into the Unknown. A quiet life begins to shift as unseen eyes watch from the shadows. Choices must be made, choices that will shape a destiny no one fully understands. And sometimes the smallest decision becomes the doorway to an entirely different world. The journey continues.
Chapter 26. A Session of Target Practice. Footsteps echoed softly through the narrow underground corridor. Klein walked behind the priest in silence, his posture straight and his thoughts controlled like still water. Neither man attempted conversation. The only sound was the rhythm of shoes striking stone. After passing through a guarded passageway, the priest unlocked a concealed door and gestured toward a descending stone stairwell. He quietly instructed Klein to turn left at the intersection ahead to reach Chanis Gate. Klein responded with the sign of the crimson moon across his chest. The priest returned the blessing to the goddess. Their exchange ended there, brief and ritualistic. Without another word, Klein stepped down the dim stone stairwell illuminated by rows of refined gas lamps. Halfway down, Klein instinctively glanced back. The priest remained standing at the entrance above, swallowed by shadow. In the darkness, he looked strangely motionless, like a wax statue watching from afar. Klein turned away and continued downward until his shoes met the cold stone flooring of the underground corridor. When he reached the intersection, he ignored the path toward Chanis Gate. Instead, he turned right and climbed another set of stairs. Soon he emerged inside Blackthorn's security company. The offices were mostly quiet, their doors closed or slightly ajar. Rather than intrude, Klein walked calmly toward the reception desk. There, Roseanne sat reading a magazine with an innocent smile. Klein tapped sharply on the desk to get her attention. Roseanne jumped to her feet in panic, knocking over her chair. She quickly greeted Klein while trying to regain composure, clearly embarrassed at being caught distracted. "Good weather today." "Oh, Klein? Why are you here?" She patted her chest repeatedly as if calming a racing heart. Klein explained simply that he needed to speak with the Captain Dunn Smith. "You scared me. I thought the captain suddenly came out. Next time, knock properly. Honestly, you're lucky I'm a generous woman. No, a lady." After scolding him lightly, she pointed him toward Dunn's office across from Mrs. Oriana's room. Klein smiled faintly at her dramatic reaction. Before leaving, Roseanne curiously asked why he needed to see the captain. "It's confidential." Her eyes widened in disbelief, but Klein simply bowed politely and continued down the hallway. She knocked on Dunn Smith's office door. "Come in." Klein entered, closed the door behind him, removed his hat, and greeted the captain respectfully. Dunn sat behind his desk, dressed in a white shirt and black vest, his gray eyes calm and perceptive. "What brings you here?" Klein spoke honestly without exaggeration. "Someone has been following me." Dunn leaned back in his chair and studied Klein silently for a moment. Instead of immediately discussing the follower, he asked where Klein had come from. "From the cathedral." Dunn nodded slightly before offering a possible explanation. "It could be that Welch's father doubts the official cause of death. He might have hired a private investigator from Constant City to look into the matter." But Dunn did not stop there. Another possibility lingered. Of course, it could also be related to the Antigonus family notebook. Someone else may be searching for it. Klein felt the weight of those words. What should I do? Dunn lifted his coffee cup and took a slow sip before answering. Go back the way you came, then behave normally. Do whatever you want. Anything? Anything. Just don't break the law or scare them away.
Klein returned underground the same way he had come. At the intersection, he turned left, entering the silent passage illuminated by dim gas lamps. His footsteps echoed through the emptiness. Soon he reached the stairwell again. The priest stood there exactly as before, silent and unmoving. Neither of them spoke. The priest simply stepped aside, allowing Klein to pass. Moments later, Klein returned to the cathedral's prayer hall. Sunlight streamed through the circular stained openings behind the altar, filling the sacred space with pale light. Several believers still waited outside the confessional, though fewer than before. Klein waited briefly before calmly exiting the cathedral as if nothing unusual had happened. The instant he stepped outside, the blazing sun greeted him, along with the familiar sensation. He was being watched again. The feeling was sharp and unmistakable, like prey sensing the gaze of a hawk. Yet something about it bothered him. Why had the observer not followed him into the cathedral? Anyone could have pretended to pray while continuing surveillance. The only explanation was fear. Fear of the church. If the watcher truly feared entering a cathedral, then he was unlikely to be an ordinary private investigator. With that realization, Klein's anxiety eased slightly. Instead of heading home, he casually wandered through nearby streets until he reached a weathered building behind Zoutland Street. The sign outside read Zoutland Shooting Club. Part of the police department's underground shooting range had been opened to the public. Klein stepped inside. The moment he entered, the sensation of being watched vanished. Klein presented his Special Operations Department badge to the attendant. After verification, he was escorted underground to a private 10-meter shooting lane. Klein removed his revolver from the holster beneath his arm and took out a box of bullets. Being followed had awakened a powerful desire to protect himself. He would not delay training any longer. First, he opened the revolver's cylinder and removed the silver demon-hunting rounds. He replaced them with ordinary brass bullets. Unlike before, he practiced in full formal attire, hat included. If danger appeared on the street, there would be no time to change clothes. He raised the revolver with both hands and aimed toward the distant target. Instead of firing immediately, he recalled lessons from military training, proper stance, sight alignment, and recoil control. Again and again he practiced the motion of aiming without firing. His clothes rustled as he repeated the stance, like a student preparing for an examination. After several repetitions, Klein rested on a bench and massaged his sore arms. A few minutes later, he stood once more and raised the revolver. The first shot rang through the chamber. Bang! The recoil pushed his arm backward and the bullet missed entirely, but Klein continued firing. Bang! 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 Shot after shot echoed through the underground range. Gradually, his aim improved. After emptying the cylinder, he reloaded and continued practicing. 30 rounds disappeared one after another as he alternated between shooting and resting. By the end, Klein was finally striking the target reliably, and sometimes even the center. Klein reloaded the revolver with the engraved demon-hunting bullets, leaving one chamber empty as a precaution against accidental firing. Then he holstered the weapon and brushed dust from his clothes. When Klein returned to the streets, the strange sensation of being watched returned as well, yet this time he felt far calmer. He walked to Champagne Street, spent 4 pence on a carriage ride, and returned to Iron Cross Street. By the time he reached his apartment building, the feeling of surveillance had vanished completely. Klein unlocked the door and stepped inside, only to find a man sitting at the desk. The tension in his chest faded instantly. "Good morning. Actually, good afternoon. Benson." The man was his elder brother,
Benson Moretti. Though only 25, his receding hairline and weary look made him appear several years older. "Good afternoon, Klein. How did the interview go?" Klein replied with a perfectly serious expression. "Terrible." Seeing Benson's concern, Klein burst into laughter and revealed the truth. "I didn't attend the interview. I already found a job. It pays £3 a week." Benson relaxed immediately and chuckled. "Looks like my little brother has grown up." He suggested celebrating the good news with beef for dinner. Klein agreed, but joked about Melissa worrying over expenses. While discussing money, Klein complained about the kingdom's absurd coin system, pounds, soli, and pence, arranged in confusing conversions. Benson suddenly stepped forward with a stern expression. "It's not one of the most foolish systems. It's the most foolish coin system in the world." Klein blinked in surprise before laughing loudly. His brother's humor had always been unexpectedly sharp. And for a brief moment, the tension of unseen watchers, hidden dangers, and mysterious notebooks faded, replaced by the simple comfort of home. Outside, the afternoon sun slowly drifted toward evening. Within the quiet apartment, laughter lingered gently in the air. For now, the world felt almost peaceful.
Chapter 27. An Evening Meal Among Siblings. Klein burst into laughter after hearing Benson's blunt remark about the ridiculous currency system. Drawing from the sharp wit he once developed in another life, he added another sarcastic jab. The comment landed perfectly, making the absurdity even more obvious. Benson responds with delighted approval. "That's brilliant, really brilliant. Klein, you've become far more humorous than before." After calming down, Benson spoke about his schedule. He would be heading to the docks for work later that afternoon. Tomorrow would be his only day off. Benson explains his plan. "Tomorrow, I'll take both of you to the Tingen City Housing Improvement Company. We'll see if they have any affordable terrace houses for rent. And before that, I need to talk to Mr. Frankie." Klein frowned slightly. Klein asks, "Our landlord? Does he actually own terrace houses in better areas?" Benson glanced at him strangely. Benson replies, "Did you forget that we signed a 1-year lease with him? We've only stayed here for half a year." Klein inhaled sharply. He had completely forgotten the contract. Even though rent was paid weekly, the agreement itself lasted 12 months. Leaving early would count as breaking the contract. If the landlord chose to pursue legal action, the compensation could be devastating. Klein ran his hand across his receding hairline. Benson explains, "I worked hard to secure that clause when we signed the lease. Otherwise, Mr. Frankie would only have agreed to 3-month contracts." He continued explaining how landlords treated poor tenants differently from wealthy ones. Benson elaborates, "Wealthy tenants get long leases for stability, but for people like us, landlords worry something might happen and they'll lose their rent. That's why they prefer short contracts." Klein immediately understood the reasoning. Klein summarizes, "So they can raise the rent whenever they want." Benson nodded. Benson comments, "That's simply how society works." But he quickly reassured Klein that the contract problem could be handled. Benson reassures him, "Don't worry, I'll talk to Mr. Frankie tomorrow. He's very easy to persuade." Then Benson insulted the landlord's intelligence. The remark reminded Klein of a sarcastic joke from his past life. Klein responds, "No, Benson, you're mistaken." Benson asks, "What do you mean?" Klein delivers the punchline. "Mr. Frankie is slightly smarter than a monkey, but only when he's performing at his best." Benson burst into uncontrollable laughter. Eventually, the laughter faded. Benson insisted that as gentlemen, they should negotiate properly instead of using tricks. Soon after, the brothers prepared a simple lunch using leftover fish soup and buttered rye bread. Though modest, the aroma of butter made the meal surprisingly satisfying. Later, Benson left for work. With a few soli and some spare coins, Klein headed to the lettuce and meat market. He bought beef, a fresh fish, and several vegetables. Potatoes, peas, radishes, rhubarb, lettuce, and turnips filled his bag. He also purchased spices such as rosemary, basil, and cumin. Throughout the trip, Klein continued feeling the same strange sensation. Someone was watching him. After stopping briefly at a bakery, he returned home and began exercising. Since he had forgotten most of his military boxing techniques, he improvised by lifting heavy books to strengthen his arms. He avoided pushing himself too far. Exhaustion could become dangerous if the mysterious observer suddenly made a move. Later in the evening, Benson and Melissa returned home. The table soon filled with dishes: stewed beef, mashed potatoes, pea soup, sweet rhubarb, and buttered rye bread. The aroma filled the entire room. Benson's stomach growled loudly as Klein placed a plate of crispy fried fish in the center of the table. Klein presents dessert. "You two can have ginger beer. Melissa, this lemon pudding is for you." Benson raises a toast. "This dinner is to celebrate Klein getting a proper job." Klein answers, "Praise the lady." The siblings began eating. Benson praised the mashed potatoes enthusiastically, while Melissa quietly enjoyed the beef stew. The fried fish turned out perfectly crisp and golden. Only the thick pea soup disappointed Klein slightly. Its sweet and sour flavor felt strange to him, though Benson and Melissa seemed satisfied. Eventually, the siblings leaned back in their chairs, completely full. Benson raises his cup again. "Let's praise the lady one more time." Klein replies, "Praise the lady." Melissa follows softly. "Praise the lady." Klein teased Melissa for saving her pudding until the end. Klein explains, "You should eat your favorite dish first. When you're already full, you can't enjoy it properly." Melissa replies stubbornly, "It still tastes just as good." After chatting happily, the siblings cleaned the table together and returned to their studies. At 11 o'clock, they extinguished the gas lamp and went to bed. Later that night, Klein suddenly saw a familiar figure standing before him in a dream. It was Dunn Smith. Dunn gives instructions. "An intruder has entered your room. Take your revolver and force him into the corridor. Leave the rest to us." Klein responds, "Understood." The dream shattered like bursting bubbles. Klein slowly opened his eyes and looked toward the desk near the window. A thin stranger stood there silently, searching through his belongings in the darkness. The quiet night held its breath. Something had finally stepped out of the shadows. Chapter 28: The Intruder and the Hidden Organization. Klein's heart pounded violently in the darkness. Each beat thudded against his chest as fear tightened his muscles. For a moment, his thoughts nearly froze completely. The thin figure near the desk suddenly paused, tilting his head slightly as if listening for any sound. Blood rushed back to Klein's mind, restoring his ability to think clearly. Slowly, carefully, he reached beneath his pillow. His fingers found the wooden grip of the revolver. The familiar weight steadied his nerves. Moving silently, he pulled the weapon free and raised it toward the intruder's head. Though he had practiced shooting earlier, Klein knew very well that hitting a live target was far different from striking a stationary one. Still, he remembered an idea from his previous life. The greatest power of a weapon often lies in the threat of using it. As long as he did not fire recklessly, the intruder could not know whether Klein was a skilled marksman or an amateur. That uncertainty alone could restrain the intruder's actions. Fear and hesitation would become Klein's strongest advantage. Just as the revolver aimed steadily at him, the thin man froze. Klein speaks calmly. "Good evening, sir." The intruder stiffened slightly. Klein gives an order. "Please raise both hands and slowly turn around. I should warn you that I'm easily startled. If you move too quickly, I might panic and accidents can happen." The man slowly lifted his hands beside his head. Gradually, he turned his body. First came a fitted black suit with neatly arranged buttons. Then his sharp brown eyebrows came into view. Finally, the man's eyes appeared. Deep blue and cold, they stared directly at Klein with a predator's intensity. The gaze suggested that if Klein made even the slightest mistake, the intruder might lunge forward without hesitation. Klein tightened his grip on the revolver and forced himself to remain calm. Klein gestures toward the door. "Let's continue this conversation outside. It would be rather impolite to disturb others who are sleeping. Please move slowly and quietly." Under the aim of the revolver, the intruder obeyed. Step by careful step, he walked toward the door. He grasped the handle and slowly opened it. But the moment the door opened halfway, the man suddenly dropped low and rolled forward. The door slammed shut behind him with a heavy thud. Above Klein, Benson stirred slightly in the upper bunk. Just as he seemed about to wake, a calm and gentle melody drifted through the corridor outside. A deep voice began reciting a poem. Fear looms in the darkness, while crimson hope still cries. One truth alone is certain: this fleeting life passes by. That truth stands firm, while the rest become lies. The flower that once blossoms must someday die. The strange recitation carried a soothing rhythm. Its words seemed to possess a calming power. Benson slowly relaxed and drifted back to sleep. In the next room, Melissa remained undisturbed. Even Klein felt his mind becoming unusually peaceful. The tension drained away, leaving him strangely relaxed. Meanwhile, the intruder had vanished down the corridor with astonishing speed. Klein hadn't even had time to react. Looking at the closed door, Klein muttered quietly. Klein murmurs to himself, "You probably wouldn't believe it, but pulling the trigger wouldn't have fired a bullet." After all, the chamber aligned with the barrel had been deliberately left empty.
Klein remained seated as the quiet melody continued outside. Patiently, he waited for whatever confrontation was happening in the corridor to end. Less than a minute later, the soft voice stopped. The night returned to silence. Klein rotated the revolver cylinder slightly, moving the empty chamber away from the firing position. Then he waited. 10 long minutes passed in uneasy silence. Just as Klein began wondering whether he should check the corridor, a familiar voice came from outside the door. "Dunn Smith speaks. It's over." Klein released a quiet breath. Gripping his revolver, he picked up his key and approached the door barefoot. He unlocked it slowly and opened the door just enough to peek outside. There stood Dunn Smith, dressed in his usual black windbreaker and half-top hat. Klein stepped out and closed the door behind him. They walked together to the end of the corridor where faint crimson moonlight filtered through the window. Dunn begins explaining. "It took some time for me to enter his dream." Klein felt a wave of relief, but curiosity quickly followed. Klein asks, "Do you know who he works for?" Dunn nodded. Dunn explains. "He belongs to an old organization known as the Secret Order. It dates back to the Fourth Epoch and has ties to the Solomon Empire and several fallen noble families." Dunn continued explaining the situation. Dunn elaborates further. "The diary connected to the Antigonus family originally came from them. Because of a member's mistake, it ended up in the antique market where Welch obtained it. That is why they sent someone to retrieve it." Dunn added that the Nighthawks would now pursue additional clues to locate other members. Dunn continues, "They are extremely good at hiding, but after tonight they will likely assume we have already obtained the notebook or discovered something important. In most situations, they would abandon the operation." Klein could not help asking another question. Klein asks cautiously, "And if the notebook truly is something extremely important?" Dunn merely smiled without answering directly. After a short pause, Dunn's tone changed. Dunn offers a choice. "You have earned a reward for your quick thinking tonight. You may choose whether to become a Beyonder." Klein's breathing became slightly heavier. Dunn explained that Klein could choose a starting potion from several Sequence 9 paths. Alternatively, he could refuse and accumulate merit until he qualified for the Church's Sleepless sequence. Klein did not hesitate to ask for details. Klein asks, "What options do I have?" Dunn turned towards the crimson moon shining outside. Dunn explains the first option. The first is Mystery Prior. It grants knowledge of mystical arts such as rituals, astrology, and magical studies. He explained that this path originally came from the Moses ascetic order. Dunn elaborates. Members of that order valued discipline and knowledge. Those who joined were required to remain silent for 5 years to cultivate focus.
Mystery priors could sense hidden supernatural existences and possessed broad mystical knowledge. However, the church only possessed incomplete sequences for this path. Klein listened carefully. Dunn introduces the second option. The second is corpse collector. After consuming the potion, wandering spirits may treat you as one of their own. You gain resistance to decay and can perceive certain undead beings. Dunn added that later sequences along that path eventually led to the role known as spirit medium. Klein considered the information silently. Finally, Dunn mentioned the third possibility. Dunn states the final option. The last option is called seer. Klein's pupils tightened immediately. In his memory, a line from Emperor Rosel's diary surfaced vividly. The emperor had once written that if he could choose again, he would pick one of three paths: apprentice, bandit, or seer. And now that very path had appeared before Klein. The crimson moon hung silently outside the window, and the choice waiting before him had quietly changed his future. Chapter 29. Decisions about work and a place to live. Klein forced himself to appear calm as he stood beneath the faint crimson moonlight. The weight of the decision before him lingered heavily in his mind. After a moment of thought, he turned to Dunn Smith with a question that revealed genuine curiosity. Klein asks carefully, "What abilities would someone gain by becoming a seer?" Dunn shook his head lightly, a quiet chuckle escaping him. Dunn clarifies, "That question isn't quite correct. It would be more accurate to ask what abilities come from drinking the seer potion." His gray eyes shifted away from the crimson moon as he began explaining. Dunn elaborates. The potion opens the door to many mystical practices, things like astrology, card divination, pendulum readings, and other methods of spiritual observation. However, Dunn made it clear that consuming the potion would not instantly grant mastery. Dunn continues, "The potion simply gives you the ability and potential to learn these things. You must still study and train to develop those skills." He also explained one important weakness. Dunn explains further. Seers lack direct combat abilities. Ritual magic requires preparation and cannot easily be used during a fight. Because of this, seers tended to become scholars of mysticism rather than frontline fighters. Klein listened silently, his mind turning over the possibilities. Here, the description appealed strongly to him. Learning mystical knowledge had always been his goal. Yet doubts still lingered. The church did not possess the higher sequences for the seer pathway. Without those, his advancement might be limited. As these thoughts clashed in his mind, Dunn watched him quietly with a faint smile. Dunn offers advice. "You don't need to decide right now. Think about it carefully and give me your answer on Monday." He assured Klein that no one among the Nighthawks would judge him for whichever choice he made. Dunn encourages him. "Listen to your heart before deciding." After saying this, Dunn removed his hat and bowed slightly. Without waiting for a reply, he walked down the corridor toward the stairwell. Klein returned the bow silently and watched him disappear. For a long time he remained standing in place, weighing the opportunity before him. He had once longed desperately to become a Beyonder, yet now that the chance stood before him, uncertainty filled his thoughts. Missing sequences, the danger of losing control, and the strange whispers that could drive people mad, all of these possibilities formed invisible barriers in his mind. He inhaled deeply and let the breath escape slowly. A faint smile appeared on his face. Klein mutters to himself.
No matter how difficult this choice is, it can't be worse than asking a teenager to decide their entire future. With that thought, he returned quietly to his room and lay down on the bed. The faint crimson glow of the moon colored the underside of the upper bunk. Outside, distant carriage wheels rattled through the night, while a drunken passerby staggered along the street. Instead of disturbing the silence, those sounds only deepened the stillness of the hour. As Klein stared into the darkness, memories from another world slowly surfaced. He remembered exercising with friends, the booming voice of his father, and his mother who worked tirelessly despite her illness. He recalled childhood companions, casual games of basketball and mahjong, and even a failed confession that still lingered in his memory. These memories flowed quietly like a calm river. Only after losing those moments did he truly understand their value. By the time dawn painted the sky gold, Klein had made his decision.
Morning arrived with soft sunlight filtering through the streets of Tingen. Klein washed his face in the public bathroom to fully wake himself. Afterward, he visited Mrs. Wendy's shop and bought 8 pounds of rye bread to replenish their food supply. While eating breakfast, he noticed something interesting. Klein comments, "It looks like the price of bread has finally stabilized." It was Sunday, which meant both Klein and Melissa could rest from work. Sitting comfortably in a chair, Klein flipped through several outdated newspapers he had collected. One advertisement caught his attention. Klein reads aloud, "There's a house for rent in North Borough, 2 floors, multiple bedrooms, a dining room, a garden, and even private land." The weekly rent, however, was extremely expensive. Benson placed his hat on his head and laughed lightly. Benson responds, "That's something we can aim for in the future. Houses advertised in newspapers are usually too costly." He explained that the Tingen City Housing Improvement Company often offered more affordable options. Melissa stepped out of her room wearing a modest gray dress that had clearly been repaired many times. Melissa asks quietly, "Why don't we check the Working Class Housing Improvement Association?" Benson chuckled and asked where she had heard about that organization. Melissa answers softly, "Mrs. Rochelle mentioned it while we were washing up last night." Benson patiently explained the difference between the two organizations. Benson explains, "The Association for the Working Class mainly builds apartments with shared bathrooms. They're designed for the poorest families. Those apartments offered only very small living spaces. The company they planned to visit, however, also provided housing for the lower middle class." With that settled, the 3 siblings prepared to leave. Klein suggests, "Then let's go and take a look." They stepped outside and began walking toward Daffodil Street. Along the way, Benson explained why such housing companies were sometimes called 5% charities. Benson explains, "They raise funds through donations, government loans, and investments. Investors receive about 5% from the rent collected." Melissa wondered about organizations that operated purely as charities. Melissa asks, "I heard there are companies that operate completely for charity." Benson nodded but explained the reality. Benson responds, "Some do exist, but their rules are very strict." He described the regulations, vaccinations, cleaning duties, restrictions on business activities, and rules controlling children's behavior. Klein frowned slightly. Klein responds, "Those rules sound reasonable to me." Melissa quietly agreed. Benson stopped walking for a moment and looked at them both. Benson explains gravely, "You two haven't seen real poverty. Many families can't afford vaccines. Some rely on subletting rooms or working from home just to survive." He described children forced into labor and parents struggling simply to endure each day. The words painted a harsh picture of life at the bottom of society. Klein shivered slightly as he listened. Melissa spoke after a long silence. Melissa confesses quietly, "My friend Jenny stopped inviting me to visit after their family moved to the lower streets." Benson sighed softly. Benson replies, "I hope her father recovers and finds stable work, but many people drown their troubles in alcohol." The siblings fell into silence. Soon they arrived at the Tingen City Housing Improvement Company. A friendly, middle-aged man greeted them with a warm smile. The man introduces himself. "You may call me Scarter. What kind of house are you looking for?" Klein gestured toward Benson, letting him speak. Benson answers directly. "We're interested in a terrace house." Scarter searched through several documents. Scarter explains. "We currently have 5 available. The weekly rent ranges from 12 to 16 soli." He handed them the detailed listings. The 3 siblings studied the document carefully. After a moment, all 3 of them pointed to the same address. Benson speaks. "Let's start by looking at the one on 2 Daffodil Street." Klein and Melissa nodded. It was a neighborhood they already knew well, and perhaps it could become their next home. The quiet hope of change lingered gently in the air.
Chapter 30. The first step toward a new life. Rows of terrace houses lined Daffodil Street, their gray-blue walls glowing faintly beneath the daylight. Each building had a multifaceted roof and several chimneys rising toward the sky. The entrances faced directly onto the street, simple and practical in design. Klein, Benson, and Melissa followed the housing agent toward one of the doors. Scarter begins explaining the layout. "Our terrace houses don't have a foyer. When you enter, you step straight into the living room. The oriel window facing the street provides excellent lighting. Sunlight streamed through the large window as they stepped inside. A fabric sofa rested within the warm golden glow. Compared with their cramped apartment, the room already felt spacious." Scarter pointed around the area while continuing his introduction. Scarter explains. "This space can serve as both the living room and a guest hall. The dining area is to the right, and the fireplace on the left wall will keep the house warm during winter." Klein noticed that the living and dining areas were connected without walls dividing them. The open layout gave the space a broader feeling, though parts farther from the window appeared slightly dim. A sturdy red wooden table stood in the dining area, surrounded by 6 cushioned chairs. The fireplace looked exactly like the ones Klein remembered seeing in films. Scarter continues the tour. Behind the dining area is the kitchen. Opposite the living room, you'll find a small guest room and a bathroom. The bathroom was cleverly divided into 2 sections. One part was meant for washing and grooming, while the inner portion held the toilet behind a folding door. The guest room, though described as small, was nearly the same size as Melissa's current bedroom. She stared around in astonishment. After finishing the first floor, Scarter guided them toward the stairway. Scarter explains further. "Below the stairs, there's an underground cellar. It can be a bit stuffy, so you'll want to air it out before entering." They continued up to the 2nd floor. Scarter describes the upper floor. On the left side, there's a bathroom and 2 bedrooms. The same arrangement appears on the right, though that bathroom is next to the balcony. The bathroom upstairs contained a proper bathtub. Although dust had gathered slightly, the room was still clean and comfortable. Melissa lingered there for a moment, stunned by the sight. Only when Scarter moved on did she follow. Klein also felt quietly thrilled. Sharing a cramped bathroom with other tenants had always been unpleasant, especially when lines formed during busy hours. The remaining bedrooms were similar in size, each containing a bed, wardrobe, and table. One room stood slightly larger than the others and included a bookshelf. Scarter finishes the tour. The balcony is rather small, so drying many clothes at once may be difficult. The weekly rent is 13 soli, plus 5 pence for furniture usage. A deposit equal to 4 weeks' rent is also required. Klein suddenly asked something unexpected. Klein asks, "How much would a house like this cost to buy?" Benson and Melissa both turn toward him with astonished expressions. Scarter replies firmly, "We do not sell properties. Our company only rents them out." Klein quickly clarified that he was only curious about the general value. Scarter explains, "A similar property nearby was recently sold with a 15-year land deed for £300. Buying the property entirely would cost about £850. Klein silently calculated the numbers in his mind. With their current income and living expenses, saving such an amount would take decades. Even the cheaper land deed would still require many years of careful saving. In a world without housing loans, renting was clearly the only practical choice for most people. Klein stepped aside and signaled Benson to begin negotiating.
Meanwhile, Melissa's shining eyes revealed how much she loved the house.
Benson slowly walked around the rooms, tapping his cane thoughtfully. Benson begins negotiating. We should probably view other houses before deciding. The dining room lighting isn't very good, the balcony is quite small, and some of the furniture looks rather worn. For nearly 10 minutes, he continued pointing out small imperfections. Benson presses further. If we moved in, we would need to replace a good portion of this furniture. Eventually, his persistent complaints convinced Scarter to lower the rent slightly. The weekly rent dropped to 12 soli, the furniture fee decreased to 3 pence, and the deposit was rounded to £2. Soon after, the siblings returned to the housing company office and signed the rental contract. They then visited the city's notary office to legalize the agreement. After paying the deposit and first week's rent, Klein and Benson counted their remaining funds. £9, 2 soli, and 8 pence remained. Standing before the door of 2 Daffodil Street, each of them held a key in their hands. For a moment, none of them could speak. Melissa speaks softly. It feels almost like a dream. Benson exhaled slowly. Benson replies, Then let's make sure we don't wake up. Klein nodded calmly. Klein suggests, We should change the locks on the doors as soon as possible. Benson shook his head with a smile and reminded them that another matter still needed handling. They returned briefly to their apartment before visiting their landlord, Mr. Frankie. When they entered his room, the short man immediately declared his strict rule about unpaid rent. Benson states their intention. We came here to terminate our lease. Klein was stunned by how directly Benson said it. Frankie waved his arms angrily. Frankie protests. That's impossible. The contract still has 6 months remaining. Benson remained perfectly calm. Benson explains. You could actually earn more money if we moved out. Frankie leaned forward with interest. Benson elaborated. A larger family with multiple earners would pay more than we currently do. He added that rental prices had been rising in recent years. If Frankie rented the apartment again, he could likely charge a higher price. Frankie's expression slowly changed. Benson proposes a solution. We will leave our 3 soli deposit as compensation while you find a new tenant. Frankie nodded enthusiastically and agreed. Klein watched the exchange with disbelief. Resolving the contract had been far easier than he expected. Afterward, they bought Klein a new formal outfit and began moving their belongings. They carried everything themselves, making several trips between the 2 streets. By evening, the sun's golden rays streamed through the window of their new home. Klein placed his books neatly onto the shelf and set an ink bottle on the desk. The move was finally complete. When he stepped outside his room, Benson and Melissa emerged from theirs at the same time. Seeing the dust and sweat covering each other's faces, the brothers burst into laughter. Melissa tried to remain composed, but she soon joined in. The following morning, Klein stood before a tall mirror adjusting his new suit. The elegant clothes made him appear more refined and scholarly. After hiding his revolver and taking his cane, he traveled to Blackthorn Security Company. Roseanne greeted him cheerfully while preparing coffee. Roseanne speaks. Good morning, Klein. Aren't those formal clothes too hot for summer? Klein replies humorously. Fashion has its price. He soon entered Dunn Smith's office. The captain looked at him calmly. Dunn Smith asks, Have you made your decision? Klein inhaled deeply. Klein answers without hesitation. I choose the seer pathway. And with that answer, the first step towards his new life quietly began. The path ahead remained unknown, but the door to it had finally opened. Some doors open quietly, and only later do we realize how far they lead. For now, the path ahead remains hidden in shadow. We'll continue this journey in the next episode. This episode is an original retelling inspired by a popular web novel.